Okay, folks, let's get this show on the road. We are the UK House Price Index according to Zoopla up to July 2022. So this is what we're going to go over. We're going to go over some of the numbers. We're going to go some of the in-depth into the details of what the property market is like in Fife and also right across the whole of the UK itself, the reasons why the market's levelling off and maybe is there going to be a housing crash? Well, we'll look at the numbers and we'll see where it's going to go from there. Incidentally, there's an update coming out through the Courier as well, and we've been asked to put an article in for that, so we've done that and submitted it. So that should be out in the next week or two through the local Courier and online as well. So UK House Price Index for Zoopla, the executive summary so far is demand is weakening over summer more than last year. New sales volumes are actually holding up, supporting headline price growth. Now, if anybody's seen that recently, we've been actually putting the sales volumes every single week, week in, week out for the last year and a half. And you can see instrumentally in Fife itself, all the sales volume seems to be the same every single week. So there's not a dip in sales volumes. However, there is an improvement in the number of supply coming on as well. But let me talk about that overall in detail in a minute. The cost of living is clearly hitting lower income households hardest, while those that buy homes tend to be on higher incomes. Higher mortgage rates are to have a greater impact on activity in the second half of the year. Mortgage rates for new buyers are on track to hit 4%. The average first-time buyer will need an extra £12,250 in income to buy a home compared to a year ago, and up to 35,000 more in the London area. Finally, higher mortgage rates will impact activity and prices in higher priced unaffordable markets and less so in lower value markets themselves. Let's look at some numbers here. I love a good graph. Don't know about you. You've got any comments about this, please feel free to make some comments here, but I'll just go over some numbers and tell you what we're looking at right here. So this shows us about demand. UK house prices increased by, according to Zoopla. Remember, Zoopla's index is what they're selling, so what they're going on it and what they're selling at. So they just look at theirs in isolation for the numbers, but Zoopla have a huge volume of traffic going through. They see demand weakening but not falling. UK house prices increased by 8.3%, or 19,800 in the past 12 months. The Southwest and Wales are jointly the best performing regions, with annual house price growth of 10.6%. Strong demand and healthy volumes of new sales agreed in the first half of the year continues to support headline rate growth. New sales agreed remain in line with the last year, while stock levels have started to rebuild off a low base. So this is why we've got it here. So here we have here this graph. So you can see on the right hand side here, in April to May 2022, the lack of stock was 37% below the 5-year average. So this is compared to the 5-year average. So it meant that the number of houses available for sale on the market was 37% less from April to May than it was in the 5-year average. Now it's dropped to 27% less than the 5-year average from July to August. So that gives you a good indication about there's more supply coming onto the market. You can see that anyway. If you go into Zoopla, you're looking at about 720 properties available for sale right now. 2 or 3 months ago, it was 550. So there's an increase around about 30%, 25 to 30% more stock come onto the market available for sale than the quarter before. You can see there as well, number of sales agreed. See, there's the thing, 15% is the compared to the average over and above the 5-year UK average. The 13% in this July to August over the UK average over the last 5 years. So you can see sales are actually, number of sales agreed is actually holding up very, very well. Demand, here's the one here. In April to May, against the 5-year average, demand was 54% more than the 5-year average. Now it's dropped back down to 17% more than the average. This tells us clearly that we're moving into an equilibrium from a seller's market from a seller's market to roughly a seller's and buyer's market. It's even Stevens. It's leveling off quite well, which is really good for the economy, really good for house prices, really good for housing transactions as well, and good overall for credit availability through banks. It still keeps the liquidity fine because prices aren't going down. Therefore, they're still stable in terms of the mortgage lending they've put on loan to value against the properties. So buyer demand has registered the usual summer slowdown, underperforming last year as economic uncertainty increases. The chart below compares the demand for homes in the region against the 5-year average. Here it is here. So we'll just show you this one. So this chart here compares the buyer demand for homes by region against the 5-year average. So you can see there, Scotland itself in August 2021, it was actually extremely high, and then it's just dropped back down again. But remember, this is compared against the 5-year average. So it means basically that Scotland is still performing well at 25% more demand than the 5-year average itself. So it's actually quite encouraging, that sign. There's still demand in the economy for properties. Buyer interest in the summer is weakened less than last year, but it's still above 2017 to 2022, the average, which I've just said, which is allowing for seasonal factors. Zoopla expect demand to continue to underperform against last year as they move into the autumn. Demand for homes in London continues to lag the rest of the country due to the pandemic and affordability-related factors and annual price inflation at 4.1% less than the half of the UK average. You can see that there again when you go back to the one there about London. So London is right down here. So buyer demand is a lot less than the 5-year UK average, whereas every other region throughout the UK is always buyer demand is a lot more than the 5-year UK average. East Midlands is actually last year it was a huge demand, but this year it's less. Scotland seems to be the best performing so far in terms of demand, just behind the West Midlands. You can see there with the purple block there. So Scotland seems to be the best performing overall out of all the rest of them. Why wouldn't it be? Scotland's more affordable to live in. Average salary is around about the same as the UK as well. So it makes absolute sense, and on an affordability issue, that Scotland would be a better place to stay in terms of quality of life, in terms of income, in terms of economic stability. Cost of living and the housing market. Let's look at this and see how the cost of living will affect the housing market. I'll just have a wee drink. It may feel surprising that sales market activity is not weakening faster, giving increases in the cost of living. That is actually quite surprising. Rising interests and a drop in UK consumer confidence. High inflation and the rising cost of living are hitting those on lower incomes first and will take longer to impact on income on households. This latest spending survey data shows all households have been adjusted spending patterns, cutting back on non-essentials areas of spend, while those on the higher incomes have far more room to manoeuvre. Probably the essentials that you would be cutting back on is, the disposable income items like tourism, luxuries, and all the rest of it. Maybe you'll not go for that higher quality brand in the shop. You'll maybe buy a less quality brand, or you maybe just go for own label shop goods rather than actually going for. Classic example is Heinz baked beans. Rather than go for Heinz baked beans, let's go for Tesco's own or Asda's own. No promoting any shop. There are other shops available, by the way. There are other beans brands available. Cross and Blackwell is probably a beans brand that's available as well. So that's how the cost of living is affecting the housing market. In terms of buyer demand, it's not affecting it that much so far, but we expect it to come through and probably start to hit things towards the winter time, towards the beginning of the next year as well. So home buyers using a mortgage are in the higher income bands, as I said. Home buyers with mortgages tend to be in higher income bands compared to lower income households who are more likely to rent out their own home out or own their own home outright. Now, this chart actually shows this. So this is a good chart to demonstrate that. So as we can see here, right across here, the lowest percentage of income from it's going from the lowest, from the left to the right, to the highest percentage of income. You can see the pink is the renting and social and private renting, and the purple is owned outright, and the black itself is buying with a mortgage. So you can see the lowest end tend to rent. You've got it here, and the second lowest tends to rent, and then it starts to get into mortgage, and own. So mortgage actually starts to climb up in terms of there, and the highest income bracket tends to use a mortgage quite a lot. You could see owner outright in the middle here. It's the lowest, the second, the third. Now that tends to be owner occupiers, which tend to be elderly on pensions. So they'll not particularly have a mortgage. That's why they're in here, but they have a low income, but they own their house outright now. And that's why it's a big number in terms of these percentages at the lower end of the income bracket. Okay, so let's just recap on that. All the lower income spend a greater proportion of earnings are essential, including food and energy costs. Prices in these areas have risen the most. Therefore, they're feeling the cost squeeze more accurately. However, with energy prices set to jump in the autumn, which they're just set to jump in October, they've been announced at 8%. How on earth anybody's going to afford that, I do not know, but time will tell. The rising cost of living will continue to be felt across all income bands. We expect it to exert an increased impact on household decisions, including home moves itself. So that's that one there. Let's look at... okay, Dave, good question. Do you think the national UK perception of Scotland and independence possibility is impacting on interest in relocating to Scotland? That's a good question. Interestingly enough, I'd be interested to hear what you think, Dave, for a first thing. I'd be interested to hear what you think to that. I don't think that's truly hit any housing market yet or on anybody's radar just now. I think it's the whole thing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and people are now thinking about the most important thing, which is cost of living crisis. So this has become the most important thing in everybody's radar now. So the independence thing tends to be pushed down a bit. Once the cost of living thing is, the crisis is actually, I wouldn't say resolved, or some sort of headway into what we're going to be doing, how we're going to be doing, how we're going to be helping each other, I think independence will become more and more prominent on the radar of people. I think that's where it is just now, but I don't think it's a huge thing at this point in time. The news seems to be completely dominated by the cost of living crisis, and probably quite rightly so. So the sales market, just to go on from here, then the sales market itself will be more sensitive to higher mortgage rates. Despite higher living costs, pandemic factors such as the increase in working from home and the growth in retirement continue to stimulate demand for homes. This is shown by the new sales agreed measure, which is on a par with this time last year. I'll just see if I've got a graph for that. Nope. What is yet to finally impact market activities, the higher mortgage rates, because most people are on fixed rate mortgages. About 79% of people on mortgages are actually on fixed rate mortgage deals. In the last year, there's been about 91% uptake on fixed rate mortgage deals. So there's not going to be a huge impact. In the credit crunch, there was about 43% on fixed rate mortgage deals. So it just shows you how a lot more people have actually hedged themselves and protected themselves against any sudden rises in their mortgage rates, which is a good thing. It could only be a good sign for people actually doing that. Plus the fact that a lot of these people were originally stress tested in the 2014 when stress testing measures were brought in, to stress test at 3% or above, in terms of where would you be if you had your lending right now, and there was another 3% on top of that, and people were stress tested at that. Now the stress test measure has actually been just recently taken away, so that's now taken away. I suspect that's a lot to do with the fact that banks now realise that they might not be able to get people through the stress testing measures anymore because of their income criteria. So they've managed to relax that criteria. For what reason, I do not know. Possibly to lend you more money. But that time will tell what happens with that one and where that goes. So we'll see what happens, and we'll keep an eye on that over the next 2 or 3 years. While buying homes with a mortgage may be on higher incomes, the jump in mortgage rates for new buyers will add to the cost of living increases, impacting sales market activity into Q4 and into 2023 itself. While outright owners account for 1 in 4 purchases, so 25% of the market of owners, of house owners, are actually outright owners. There's no mortgage at all. Rising living costs are likely to be increasing in proportion to the households considered of households and considering downsizing to help reduce their running costs. So there will be people out there that will move and consider downsizing to just reduce their costs. So these people will replace the transactional activity of the people that might have actually moved and maybe moved a bit earlier than expected. So you might have so that might actually replace, because at the end of the day, a healthy housing market is not based on house prices. It's more based on transactional activity. And if the number of sales are staying stable, sales agreed every single week and every single month, then that's a more healthy, stable market than there is in terms of swings and roundabouts with the house prices. So we can see a stabilization of the house prices coupled with an equalization of the number of transactions sold. A house is sold every single week and every single month, stabilizing and staying the same as well. We still have a healthy housing market, and that predominantly is what our economy actually revolves around. We only rent round about 19% of people rent in the UK. In terms of when you look at Germany and Europe, they're up about 60% actually rent their homes. So completely different market in terms of economic status. If we try to compare ourselves against the European market, it's like comparing apples with plums. Okay, so we see Zoopla says they see growing pressure on the household budgets and ongoing reevaluation of housing by homeowners brought about by the pandemic, supporting the overall sales volumes. This doesn't necessarily mean higher prices, as higher costs will make consumers more cautious on what they're spending, not only on mortgage costs, but also on overall costs of running your actual home itself. Higher mortgage rates to impact demand over the second half of the year. In January 2022, new mortgage rates were still ultra cheap, as low as 2%. This has now jumped to 3.5% and set to reach about 4% as we move into the autumn. The level of mortgage rates are still low by historic standards. Remember, a 5-year fixed rate deal in the credit crunch was 6.19%. A 5-year fixed rate deal just 2 or 3 months ago was 1.79%. So finance is still historically cheap in comparison to other areas, and we can't really compare. If we do compare against the credit crunch, we're in a far better position economically than we were before going into the credit crunch and we are now in comparison to that. But home buyers have become used to very low mortgage rates, and this is why they think, because base rates go up a bit, it's a huge economic impact, and it's because possibly all our spending habits have then adapted to the ultra low interest rates, and then just when you start to eat into that and start to the mortgage rates maybe go higher and utility costs go higher, then we'll have to then reevaluate exactly what we're spending our money on, and it is something I have covered in the Courier's update. Basically, what I've said in the Courier is, let's address the elephant in the room. Is there going to be a housing market crash? And then I've gone on to explain the reasons why, and the reasons why it might happen, the reasons why it might not happen. So, as I said, watch out for that article. This means that any reversal is likely to have some impact on the demand, especially when combined with the cost of living pressures. So, what impact will this have on first-time buyers then? I hear you ask. On renting versus buying. That's a good question. So higher mortgage rates increase the monthly cost of repayments for all new home buyers. First-time buyers are the most sensitive group, alongside existing owners looking to buy a bigger home using more debt and therefore extending the size of their current mortgage. The impact will be less for those down trading or moving to similar value homes with a mortgage carryover, in other words, ported at the same rate. So you can do that. So if you do have an existing home and then you decide to move to another home, you could potentially just port your mortgage if you've got a redemption penalty. And most mortgage companies won't actually apply the redemption penalty at all, because all you're doing is porting your mortgage from one house to the next house. I did it personally as well. At the credit crunch, we moved next door and we just ported our mortgage, didn't do anything else other than just port the mortgage to the new home, and there was no penalties at all. So that can easily be done. If you need to speak to a mortgage broker, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with someone, so just message us direct. More than happy to do that. Higher mortgage costs or higher mortgage rates for first-time buyers mean larger monthly repayments and the need for a greater household income to meet these increased costs. The chart below, this one here, I'll just add that here. I'll get that back up because I put that off. Here we go. This one. So this chart actually shows us the income to rent and buy a typical rented home at 2% and 4% of mortgage rates. Moving from a 2% mortgage rate to a 4% means that the average first-time buyer will need an extra £12,250 in income. So that means they'd have to earn another £12,250 income in income itself, not actually deposit. Remember, this is just income criteria. So you'd have to earn an extra to get that same property now, compared to the rates when they were lower. In London, the highest value market, which is an average price point, I think is about 505,000 to buy in London. This increases to 34,500. The increase is less than 6,000 in markets with lower prices, lower house prices. So remember the extra 12,250 I talked about. The increase is a lot less in lower housing markets. For example, Scotland, you can see that there. So look, gross income to buy at 2% mortgage rate is the purple one in Scotland. So it's low, and gross income to buy is gross income to rent is a lot higher. Gross income to buy now at 4% mortgage rate has gone slightly up. So in Scotland, it's round about the 17,000 mark gross income to buy, and then it's now going up to round about the 20,000 mark to gross income to buy. In terms of the for a typical household, you can see as it goes up. So Scotland is one of the most affordable areas. You can see down here with the northeast of England as well. So Scotland is one of the more affordable areas, and you go Northern Ireland and you go all the way up, and you can see how London is a huge amount of money to buy in terms of what you need in terms of income to buy a property on average in London at these different mortgage rates and also rent. Incidentally, it shows you here you could have less of an income. See that there? You need more of an income in London. It's the other way around. You need more of an income to buy at the 4% mortgage rate than it is actually to rent. And yet in Scotland, you need more income to rent than it is to actually to buy. See that? That's what that wee graph shows you. So hopefully that's giving you an insight into that. So just to recap that, however, compared to the income needed to rent, the income needed to buy at 4% mortgage rate would remain lower on a par with renting in all areas outside of southern England. These are affordable markets where first-time buyers have tendency to buy larger and higher value homes as they have buying power to enable to do this. The lack of material overvaluation in UK home values means mortgage rates of up to 4% are not on their own sufficient to result in UK-wide price falls. So I'll say that again. The lack of material overvaluation in UK home values means that mortgage rates of up to 4% are not on their own sufficient to result in UK-wide price falls. So that then gives us a good indication that there's no housing market crash coming. So how does higher rates impact demand in higher value markets? Okay, so let me explain. Just have a wee drink. The higher income needed to buy a home, the more households are priced out of the market, which over time reduces the pool of demand for homes. So supply and demand. The impact of rising mortgage rates will be felt most acutely in high value markets in southern England, where affordability is already a drag on market activity. Zoopla's data shows demand for homes already weakest in the higher value areas, such as London, a trend that is likely to worsen for those looking to buy their first home as mortgage rates move higher up. First-time buyers can respond to higher borrowing costs by using a bigger deposit to reduce the size of the mortgage, as well as looking to buy cheaper homes or stepping back from the market altogether. In order to fully offset the increase in mortgage rates, first-time buyers would need to almost double the size of their average deposit. Now, let me explain to you as a first-time buyer, should you wait or should you buy now? You've got to work out, if you're waiting and you're renting, how much is it going to cost in rent that you're giving away effectively when you could actually be buying your house earlier? And when you work that out, we worked out in a previous show, actually over a 2-year period, you're actually better to buy right now, even if the market drops 10%. Even if the market drops 20%, you're actually probably better to buy right now as a first-time buyer, because the average price in Fife of a first-time buyer property is proportionally less in terms of what you have to pay to the mortgage to that as it is to the amount of money you actually spend on rent over that 2-year period to wait for that to happen. The likelihood of that happening is very extremely remote, I have to say. It's very remote in this context, because that's exactly what they dropped in the credit crunch. And we can't see any signs there so far or any data that will suggest that there will be a correction like that in the housing market. I think we have reached an equilibrium where we're now at the price realignment at where we should be in terms of the Fife housing market. So Fife houses are still affordable in certain regions. Obviously, we could argue that is not the case, but in most of the regions, the average Fife house price is around about the 170,000 mark, which is extremely affordable for anybody, possibly because average house in Fife is a 3-bedroom terraced, and that's around about 170,000. So that would be a good family home or an upgrader from an apartment or a flat, or possibly as well as a downgrader as well, maybe downgrade from a bigger house to a smaller accommodation, a more sizable accommodation to reflect their needs and also release some equity as well. Maybe they want to use it for their retirement or for their pension or to help their younger children out. Probably not younger if they're retiring. Their children will be about 40 or 50. Anyway, let's talk about, so far there have been a few signs of weaker demand. This is what Zoopla is saying, and all their analysis show first-time buyers made up an increased share in all the sales of the first half of 2022, up to 35% compared to 32% in 2021. So there's 35% of people buying are first-time buyers right now in the first half of the year. Greater flexibility on where people can work and rising rental costs are supporting first-time buyer demand, as I just explained. Why would you pay all that rent out if you can buy a property and you're actually settled? That's the key here as well. You've got to be settled as well. You know, there's no point in buying a property and paying the entry fees and then paying the exit fees. And I mean the entry fees as in, if you're buying a property, could there be stamp duty? Could there be lawyers' fees? There will be. Will there be any additional fees over and above that? And then when you're exiting the market, then you've got estate agency fees, you've got lawyers' fees, and as well. So you've got to weigh up that as well. So if you're if you're thinking about buying just for a couple of years, then potentially if you're buying and selling, it might be actually the more advisable route to actually possibly to rent. Again, if you take into account, if you're getting a mortgage, you pay mortgage introduction fees, you maybe pay exit fees for the mortgage because there's a redemption penalty on it as well. Or you maybe pay higher mortgage fees because you're only having it for a couple of years because you need to keep it as a variable rate because you can't fix it. You might be able to fix it for 2 years, but you might have to fix it at a higher rate. 5-year fixed rate deals, Neil Bird was talking about the other day on our mortgage special. He says that 5-year fixed rate deals are actually less than 2-year fixed rate deals now. So there's a lot of banks out there and building sites actually encouraging people to get 5-year fixed rate deals. It also gives them certainty for the money market because they then pre-book that market up front to say they're lending that money at that rate for a 5-year period. So it gives certainty in the economy and in the economic situation for forecasting and extrapolation. Okay, so first-time buyer, they expect first-time buyer behaviours and buying patterns to shift in the second half of 2022 in response to the higher costs and the increased possibility of first-time buyers being priced out of the market. That might not be possible in Fife, I don't think, because Fife is still extremely more affordable. So what is the housing outlook in all this? Where are we going with this? Just to sum up and collate this. So here's the housing outlook so far. Here's how I see it, just to finish. The headwinds for the sales market are building, but the market is in a much better place to weather than these in previous economic cycles. This is the credit crunch and other economic cycles where activity has dropped and recessions have actually appeared as well. History shows that is the sudden changes in the level of spending on housing that are most closely linked to the changes in house price inflation and sales volumes. And this is why the energy utility bills going up might actually have an impact on this. The downside for prices and sales are most common during recessions, when consumers need to rapidly adjust and what they spend in response to unemployment or higher mortgage rates. Now, mortgage rates are still at a record low in comparison to previous historical data, but also unemployment is actually still at a record low as well. It's still sitting at 3.7%. Now, in pandemic, it was fine. In pandemic, in the credit crunch, the unemployment rate was sitting at 5.2%. So work that one out. So we're still got a lot more people earning a lot more money and contributing towards the economy in terms of the system as well. There's still 1.1 million people chasing 1.3 million jobs. So if we have a correction, and possibly some people do transition from jobs, for example, tourism is usually the first one to get hit, or the hospitality industry is the first one to get hit. The hospitality industry contracts a bit with the number of jobs, but these people can easily retrain for the jobs that are available in other industries. I mean, we've been looking for a long time for another 2 or 3 positions for the letting agents and also for estate agents. So it tells me straight away that there's a lot of jobs still out there to be filled by people that naturally might transition from one industry to another. So there is optimism on the horizon. Okay, so we talked about that. The downside for prices, we'd said unemployment, mortgage rates, higher proportion of today's mortgages are on fixed rate loans, as I'd said before, about 91% or thereabouts in the last year have actually fixed rate mortgages. A proportion of today's mortgages are on fixed rate loans, as they said, stress tested to see if they can afford up to a rate of 7%. This has baked resiliences in the market, and it will limit the downside for prices, the downside of prices. So we're more or less hedged already by what we've done before, and actually de-risking the situation in case anything else happens to the economy. That said, it's clear UK households are facing a squeeze on incomes and living standards on multiple fronts, which will filter through into the housing market activity and house price growth into 2023. The primary risk remains in further increases to the base rates in order to control inflation, which will have a knock-on impact on mortgage rates. The higher rates move above 4%, the greater the impact on prices and the sales volume, and where homeowners have plenty of equity to cushion their price falls. Now, when we talk about cushion price falls, we're talking about things like, if the market was to have a correction of 20% tomorrow, average house prices in Fife have moved up 24% in the last 2 years, which means the only people affected by a drop of 20% in the housing market in terms of prices would be the people that have actually bought in the last 2 years, because everybody before that will be at the price it was 2 years before, where we are now. So that wouldn't affect them at all in terms of mortgages, because their mortgage was all based on that. So it'll only affect people in the last 2 years. But the people in the last 2 years are less likely to move because they've usually bought a house, and the average person stays in their house for around about 50% of the market stays in their house for up to about 6 or 7 years, and 50% stay beyond 7 years. So when you look at it in that context, it's going to affect very, very few people if there is a housing correction. It won't affect anybody in the short term. And it won't affect most people because they're on fixed rate mortgages if they're on that as well. So that's why we'll have to be aware of that. Let's just finally close off here, and I'll let you look at this graph. This is the graph for the UK housing market. I'm going to zoom in on this, and then I'll scroll it so you can see. So you can see there, you've got right across the board, you've got Nottingham at 10% according to Zoopla, Leeds, you've got Edinburgh sitting at 3.8%, Aberdeen's at minus 0.9%, but again, Zoopla don't sell that much, or they don't have much coverage in Aberdeen. It tends to be the Aberdeen Solicitors Property Centre that has that. So that's kind of a misnomer, and it's not an accurate figure because Aberdeen prices are moving up month on month or year on year as well. So that kind of gives you an indication about where Zoopla thinks that is. There it is in annual price growth by region as well. You can see that there. Bournemouth, Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, London. There you go. The other one month I said it was the average price for London was 505,000. Well, it's now 522,000. Edinburgh, 262,000. The average price in Scotland is round about, it's probably, I think it's round about 190,000 for the average price in Scotland. Average price in Fife is still about 170,000, which makes it extremely more affordable to live and work in Fife. Why else would you stay in a city if you can work remotely and you could possibly trade what you've got in the city to buy a house in Fife? It is close to the beach. So you can go out on your lunchtime and you can spend time at the beach. You can go to the golf course. It's just around the corner as well, because Fife has a lot of golf courses. So why would you continue to live in the city? And this is what you see about a lot of city dwellers now are beginning to look at areas like Fife because of the affordability level and say, well, if I can work from home and I can just need to go in the office maybe once a week or maybe even once a month or once every 2 weeks, why on earth would I want to continue to live in the city at these extortionate prices if I can sell, release capital, and also buy a similar type of property where I am in Fife and then still have money left to actually invest in something else or maybe spend or maybe tide us over for the cost of living crisis? And that's how people are looking at this right now in the areas outside of the Fife area. So I do think Fife market is going to be extremely resilient through this, but we still have to see what happens in terms when the price cap hits in October, and then we have to then look at where the price cap is going to hit in January as well. Martin Lewis isn't really optimistic about the situation. He's calling for government help on this energy and cost of living crisis. It seems to be falling on deaf ears just now, but I was speaking to someone recently as a politician, well, more or less just about half an hour before I came on here, and they said there seems to be things in the pipeline in the political field in the background are working away. There seem to be doing some announcement, possibly maybe at UK level and maybe at Scottish level as well, and maybe even at council level as well. So everybody seems to be thinking about, everybody's formulating a policy, and we're looking to see what's happening and getting a bit more traction and a bit more time to see what is going to transpire rather than jumping in too early and trying to fix something that maybe doesn't appear. The key here is how to stop worrying and start living. When you worry about something, and I'll just finish off here. When you worry about something, this is the key you've got to think of. Wait till it happens, because we worry intently as human beings about maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 different scenarios that could happen. But the reality is only one thing's going to happen. But what you're doing is by worrying about 10 different things at the same time or over a period of time, it haven't happened. You're still putting yourself mentally through that torment and that turmoil. So you need to stop. You need to start focusing on something that it will happen rather than thinking about everything that could happen. We are a nation of worriers. We are a nation of people like that. We worry about everything, from the what's in our pocket to the price of a pint of beer to the weather is going to be tomorrow or today. And even in our apps, you sit and look at apps and you go, what's the weather going to be like? I better check my app. And it's like, well, why do you not just look at the window? Because that's what the weather's like right now. Why would you need an app to tell you? And we are a nation of worriers. So the key here is not to worry too much. If you're looking for advice on how to combat the cost of living crisis, we have a show we did, Richard and I, on the Wealth Creation Show, about how to beat the cost of living crisis, and it is on our YouTube channel. I'll actually just pop it in this post right now, and I'll see if I can get it for you, and I'll pop it in this post before I go, because if I don't, it won't get it. Cost of living crisis, how to beat the cost of living crisis. Here we go. I'm going to put that in there. Now, Richard and I talked about this in the show, and we demonstrated clearly how you could potentially save about £1,200 to £1,500 a month. Even if you could save £50 to £100 a month out of this advice, it's better than nothing in your pocket than someone else's. I even went to the degree or the extremities of showing you at the end of this how to actually get a pay rise out your boss and justify that so they possibly can't even say no to you. Maybe the union should actually look at that. Anyway, that's another story. Okay, hopefully that's helped. Any questions, please feel free to message me. You can put comments in there as well. And until next time, guys, I'm Jim Parker for Fife Properties TV.